Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock and time now for the noon edition of KMSL News. I'm Kevin Kilpatrick. In the news, the Office of Sheriff Terry Bolton is currently investigating a burglary that took place at the Walker Schools on the night of the 10th. Someone apparently pried open the...
Hi, I'm Keith Harris. Broadcasting is a field with many possibilities for achievement. One can go into any number of jobs, from military journalism to electrical engineering to corporate production. In radio alone, there are hundreds of possibilities for jobs. During wartime, networks send correspondents to combat areas. Advertising agencies are always putting together dynamic commercials and have a great need for voice talent. Management and sales is where the money is at in radio. But to get to the top, one must pay his dues. The logical place to start is at the bottom. That's where we're starting right now. We're going to learn the basic operations and history of radio. Please keep in mind that every radio station is different. The rules we set forth here are generally accepted in the radio medium. Operating a radio board can be an exciting experience, but a scary one if you've never played the part of a DJ before.
It takes months and many times years of practice to perfect the skills that make a good DJ. An air personality must be in complete control of many things that will happen in rapid succession.
Let's watch for a few minutes as this DJ shows us sometimes how harried it can get.
93.7 KITT with Jeff and Melinda. It's 21 minutes after 9 o'clock, 9:21. Looking at our AccuWeather, we got blue sky. The clouds are really away and chance of rain today, tonight. High of 80 degrees. Right now, we're up to a whopping 59 degrees.
Did you ever wonder what's at the center of the Earth? Everybody's speculated over the years. What do you think's in the middle of the Earth?
I don't know.
This molten blob of...
As you can see, many things can happen at once, but you must remain in control and sound as relaxed as possible at all times.
Let's start by going over the basics of operating a radio station. There are many different kinds of radio boards. Some have volume knobs, and others have slider bars. No matter what shape, size, or model your radio board is, it serves one main purpose: to mix a number of sources, such as cassette, turntable, and voice, to one signal that is broadcast to the public via radio waves.
Whether a board has slider bars or volume knobs, we refer to them as pots, which is short for potentiometer. We'll be working on a board that has volume knobs.
The pot is graded with numbers and has a switch that sets in program, audition, or neutral. When the switch is turned to program and the pot is up, whatever happens will go out over the air. Neutral means the pot is turned off. Audition is another channel which does not broadcast over the air. The pot can turn down until it clicks. This means the channel is in queue. When it's in queue, one can listen to sources to prepare them for broadcast.
We call this process queuing, such as queuing up a record.
This is done by putting the pot down till it clicks. Place the needle on the record and start the turntable. Somewhere in the booth will be a cue speaker. You will hear the sound on the record start. As soon as you hear this, stop the turntable by the power switch and rock the record back and forth. When you find the point where the sound starts, back the record up 1/4 to 1/2 turn. This will allow the record time to build up speed before the sound starts, but still gives a quick start for split-second timing.
If you miscue the record, you'll be faced with a long cue or a wow. A wow is what happens when the sound starts before the turntable has time to pick up speed.
After you get the record set where you want it, turn the pot back up so that when you start, the board will be ready.
The sources can be put into the board in any number of combinations. Your board should be clearly labeled as to which source goes through which channel.
In this particular board, we have 6 channels. The microphone, mic for short, is going through channel 1. Turntable 1 is going through channel 2. Turntable 2 is going through channel 3. The cartridge machine is going through channels 4 and 5, and the reel-to-reel telephone and cassette player are on production channel 6. Let's back up a minute and talk about the cartridge machine. Cartridges, or carts, are tapes that can play continually or can cue themselves up. Often commercials or songs are placed on these carts. When the sound is placed on the cart, a cue tone is put at the beginning. The cart plays all the way around until it reaches the tone, then it stops, ready to play again. A reel-to-reel player is another source of input into a board. The take-up reel is on the right, and the supply reel is on the left. The end of the tape is fed under the playheads and wound onto the take-up reel. Some reel-to-reel players can cue up by rocking the reels back and forth.
Often there are more inputs in the board, sometimes less. It all depends on the station at which you work.
As a disc jockey, you are responsible to a general manager and a program director, sometimes called an operations manager. The program director is much like the foreman at a construction site. They are responsible for seeing that the DJ is doing their job to fit the identity of the station. The DJ must follow a daily operations log. This log includes commercials and station identifications to be played. Also, any programs that are on the log must be played when they are scheduled. The air personality should sign the log and check off the events they perform. The program director makes sure all programs are run properly. A music director is in charge of keeping all music up to date and makes sure the DJs follow the music clock. This clock is color-coded with the sleeves of the records that are to be played at specific times. The clock should be followed as closely as possible. An air personality may also be responsible for checking transmitter readings. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC for short, requires the transmitter readings be taken every 3 hours of broadcast time. The process of taking these readings varies from station to station. The program director usually has a very defined idea of the way they want the DJs to conduct themselves on the air. The station will usually have a policy on how to conduct yourself, but the program director will give you tips, either in written notices or by discussing it with you personally.
Aside from what your program director tells you, there are many things you can do to improve the way you sound on the air.
At home, practice your voice patterns to achieve a pleasing, easy-to-listen-to voice. It's good to tape yourself as you do this. Practice reading out loud. Work on varying your pitch up and down. This will add excitement to your voice. Overdo everything you say. If you intensify your voice, you will sound normal to the listener. Remember, the listener can't see your facial expressions and gestures, so you must win them with your voice.
Listen to these announcers. The first one is talking in a conversational tone.
For years, the American Heart Association has been fighting for your life. We've supported research which has contributed to improvements in the control of high blood pressure, development of artificial valves and pacemakers, new X-ray techniques which aid in the diagnosis of heart and blood vessel disease, improved blood flow measurement in the heart and brain which enables detection of blood vessel diseases, and advances in surgical techniques to repair heart defects and make coronary bypass procedures possible.
The second announcer is overdoing and intensifying his voice so that it sounds normal to the listener.
For years, the American Heart Association has been fighting for your life. We've supported research which has contributed to improvements in control of high blood pressure, development of artificial valves and pacemakers, new X-ray techniques which aid in the diagnosis of heart and blood vessel disease, improved blood flow measurement in the heart and brain which enables detection of blood vessel disease, and advances in surgical techniques to repair heart defects and make coronary bypass procedures possible.
Timing is also a good trait of an air personality. A DJ must know how introductions end, when songs end, and how programs end, and a host of other information.
A good music director will label singles with the length of the song, the length of the intro, the tempo, and the type of outro. The intro of a song is the length of music from the first sound to the first lyric. An outro is the kind of ending. A fade drops in volume, a cold ends abruptly, and a cool ending is in between. Many air personalities do not talk without some kind of music under their voice. To do this, watch the clock from the time you start the music. Only talk for the amount of time allotted on the introduction.
Before long, you'll know the introductions well enough to know how long to talk by just listening to the music.
Until you've had plenty of practice, and maybe even after, it's a good idea to script your breaks. This means write everything you intend to say when you talk. Until you get practice, don't vary from your written script, and don't repeat yourself. Keep everything short and concise, or your listeners will lose interest. Always ask someone about words or names you can't pronounce. Don't just guess. All commercials on cartridge should have an out cue. This is symbolized by a Q and a colon. After this will be a few words such as driving to us, or maybe it will say music out.
These tell you the last thing to happen in the commercial. If the spot says driving to us, then those are the last words in the commercial. If the spot says music out, then music will be the last thing played in the commercial.
If the card has a running date on it that is expired, either pull it or bring it to the attention of your program director. If the card says TFN, that means till further notice. It will be pulled when the PD or manager has one to replace it. When you actually get on the air, make an air check. This is a cassette tape of your air work with the songs cut out. Get your program director or someone at the station to critique you. Critique yourself as well. This will help you know how to improve.
When hiring an air personality, different stations look for different qualities. Ken Sibley is the manager at KVMA AM and FM in Magnolia, Arkansas.
We listen for voice quality and, the potential that that person has. If they've got some good inflections, even though things might be a little rough at first, the voice quality, overall voice quality is what we go with first of all.
Okay. Jeff Ettman and Melinda Coyer, the #1 morning team in Shreveport, Louisiana, feel that honesty is the key factor.
But man, when I first walked in, and Jeff was sitting there, my very first interview, remember what the boss said? He said, "How much do you expect to get paid?" And I was real brave, and I sat up straight, and I said, $14,000, And he laughed at me, but I was honest. That's really what I wanted to get paid. And he sat back, he said, "Well, I'll give you 11, how about that?" I said, "Anything, that's fine, I was just eager and honest. I wanted a job in radio. Whatever it took, I'd do it.
Yeah, honesty, but a self-starter. Someone who's not afraid to take chances. It's a risk business. Someone who realizes it's okay to fail, but that no matter what happens, I'm going to give 125% to make the goal. Because if you give everything you got, there's no way you're ever going to fail. In your own mind. You may not be the #1 station, 12 plus in the market, but as long as you know what your goal is, and you can achieve that goal. So I'd say a risk taker.
Ron West, operations manager at KMSL FM in Magnolia, Arkansas, has a different opinion about those qualities.
It doesn't have anything to do with your voice. I don't feel like it has anything to do with your voice, because if a person has the character, they can develop the personality, and they can develop the experience necessary to execute the job.
What do you mean when you say character?
Just strength of character. It's the same thing that I think just about any employer looks for. You look for somebody who is stable, somebody who looks like they might be around for a while, who might be able to make a few sacrifices for you if necessary, and somebody that you feel is compatible with the other people that are on your staff.
The beginning DJ has to work hard to sound good. Here's a few tips on how to sound more professional.
Focus and discipline are two things, I think. Focus being being able to pick up on what the station's target goals are, find out what their demographics that they're aiming for are. If they're aiming for an audience 25 to 44, become familiar with it. Make yourself familiar with it. Put yourself in that mode. Try to communicate with that part of the community that you're trying to serve. Of course, you want to serve everybody. You want to be mass appeal, but if you're aiming for a focus group, get focused in on it.
The first thing that anybody has to realize when they get in the radio business is that you're not here for your own self-gratification. You're here to talk to an audience. And in radio, that audience is very personal. And people that are sitting by their radio develop a relationship with that disc jockey or that particular person on the air. And so the main thing that I would be sure and tell them is to remember that when you're on the air, you're talking one-on-one with a lot of people. But you don't regard it as the masses. You speak individually to people and build a relationship and a warmth that the people feel like they know you and feel like they can trust you.
What would be the tips that you would say if they
Learn
don't
the
know
basics
about
of
radio?
radio.
Basics, going back
Learn
to
the
that.
production room. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's never a stupid question. And if a boss says that was a stupid question, go find a new boss.
Job.
If they're working on their personality, what tips?
Be yourself. Yeah. You have traits that you'll find in radio that you've been suppressing all these years. If you try to be somebody else and put on another hat, hey, I'm going to be
People don't like you.
Shadow Stevens, an American Top 40. You'll never be that way. I always wanted to be the jock on WLS Chicago, giving us that, and all, and you can never be that.
Show preparation is sometimes the key factor to how your show runs. Jeff Ettman and Melinda Coyer, being a morning team, need more time than a single DJ would for show preparation.
Our show
You do it
prep,
24 hours a day.
everywhere you're at, you listen to people, their stories, and you write down things, that people say. Just little things that we do. Like when we get off there at 10, we go into the office and we sit down and we'll plan the next day's show. We call show prep. It takes, about an hour? Just sitting there talking about things that we
Yeah.
want to do the next day or the next day,
You always plan something. Of course,
Yeah,
the
make
best
us-
bits generally are the ones that are spontaneous. The pregnant bit this morning. People will talk about that for weeks. But you plan things, you can never go and say, okay, something's going to happen today, because it never will. So you plan things to get the ball rolling. Then those spontaneous bits come along and adds that much more excitement, and whether you do the planned things or not is insignificant.
And
But
you watch the news if
Yeah.
things are, like what with the fireworks thing, the Shreveport City Council wants to ban fireworks.
Oh,
And we ask the question. We just pose the question and let everyone else call in. And they'll get real emotional. If you can evoke an emotion, you've done good. There's some days we have scripted out something to do, and at 6 o'clock it changes. And from 6 to 10, it's all spontaneous. There are some mornings that happens. And then there's some mornings we do a spontaneous bit from 6 to 7. From 7 to 8, we follow the script. From 8 to 9, it changes back. Just according to who calls, what
it
happened, what's
depends on the
happening.
bit. It really depends on what you're doing.
On the weather, remember when we had all that bad weather last year? Oh, the whole morning show shifted to weather. How are you going to get to work? And we knew where the streets were closed or the bridges were closed. And
We had people up all night working on it.
Yeah.
So by the time we hit the air, that was a particular morning that, okay, this is not a funny morning, this is a service morning.
The listener has wants and needs that the DJ needs to fill. Be aware of these things as you prepare for your show.
Well, you owe it to your listener to inform and entertain them. You want to give them the information that they need in the community, and I guess that falls under the target or the focus of the station itself and the format itself. You owe yourself to become familiar with it. You owe yourself to be prepared when you go on the air to go in there and give 100% every time. You want to be consistent for them every time. You don't want to come in on Monday and Wednesday and have a fantastic day, and Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday just kind of wing it. You want to spread that around through the whole week.
Radio was born in the 19th century, but didn't come to fruition until the 20th century.
The Industrial Revolution changed the lives of all Americans from 1750 to 1850. Radio stemmed from this sudden burst of creative invention. Agriculture began to decline and people began to move to urban areas. The phonograph and motion picture industry began to flourish. Samuel Morse made a great breakthrough with the first operational telegraph line, and Alexander Graham Bell did the same with the advent of the telephone. But wireless communication was the goal that scientists wanted to achieve. Guglielmo Marconi provided the world with the first wireless transmission, but Reginald Fessenden's 1906 broadcast is the true genesis of radio as a broadcast tool. In this, he played the violin, sang, and read from the Bible. Ship operators far out at sea heard the broadcast. David Sarnoff had the vision in 1916 to develop radio as a household utility, such as the phonograph, or piano. Sarnoff went on to become the vice president and general manager of RCA. In 1920, Dr. Frank Conrad operated the first broadcast station. He aired sports results, music, and requests of other radio operators. KDKA went on the air on November 2nd of 1920. They first broadcast news of the Harding-Cox election and played recorded and live music. The curtains were used to dampen excess sound in the room. Though radio stations decreased during the Great Depression due to lack of investment funds, the public turned to radio as their only distraction of the grim realities of the stock market crash. Radio became a news-oriented business with the advent of World War II. It brought on-the-spot news coverage from Europe and kept America informed. After the war came pocket radios, made possible by the transistor. The 60s brought about formatting in radio. Small stations didn't have the budget to play music to please everyone, so they began targeting specific groups of listeners.
All the equipment was tube type. We didn't have any remote equipment that wasn't the size of this desk. We used to record Magnolia High School pep rallies when I first got. It was one of my first jobs as a part-time person. You had to take out a Magna quarter reel to reel. The thing was in a box that tall, and you had to take out a floor mic and took a pickup truck to get all the stuff out there to do a remote broadcast or even to tape anything. And so the biggest change has been the advent of the transistorized equipment where you got cassette tape recorders now that you can go out and get air quality tapes on and, you know, practically put them in your pocket versus toting the family farm out to do something.
The 70s brought FM radio into a new light. Listeners wanted to have the focus on themselves. How-to shows and phone-in shows became the norm.
10 years ago today, I think the music started changing quite a bit from what the country music had changed before. Back when I started with the station, they played more of a just a cross-section of music. They didn't really have a format. They played something for everybody. And we, about 10 years ago, went ahead and targeted one particular area, or it was a little more than that. We targeted music in that area. And then we had the advent of FM portable receivers and transmitters where we could go do live remotes and live broadcasts, two-way radio equipment, and a lot of different things that we was able to get that made the broadcasting of on-air things a lot easier. And of course, then the advent of all the solid-state stuff. Biggest difference now is the control is a lot cooler than it was 20 years ago because the tubes are that high and heated up the room pretty much.
When did you actually see the changeover from AM to FM? And I know you knew it was there and knew about it, but when did you see FM starting to gain an edge over AM?
Oh, in the large markets, it's really there. And in the small markets, I think AM is still a very viable product. You're going to find AM stations that have been around in small markets are still going to be your leaders. If you look at Arbitrons and whatnot all through the South, the nation, in small markets, AMs are doing very well. In large markets, AMs are not doing well. And I think the primary difference is the localization of the situations. And the AM stations are a more local operation than the big metro stations where everybody's in the battle there for the sound and the music and whatnot. So, you know, AM and FM, there's a lot of people back 20 years ago and even 10, 15 years ago that didn't think FM would be a lasting thing. They thought it was just a passing. I knew some people that even surrendered their FM licenses because they thought it was just a flash in the pan. And now it's turned around, and you're seeing a turnaround now in the AM broadcasting because there's a big movement underway now in technology to such that you're going to see AM stereo become more prevalent. You're going to see the NRSC standard, which we've already implemented here. Now they're building the receivers that will pick up the difference in the NRSC standard, which will make your AM much more compatible with your FM. And the latest thing the NAB and a lot of people are working on is a new receiver that you don't have to switch from AM to FM. It's just all up and down the dial. Everything, you don't go AM or FM, you just tune from one end all the way up to the other. And those are some of the improvements that they're doing on the AM side right now.
Right now, there's almost a die-hard difference between the two, of AM and FM. It seems that older people are loyal to their AM stations, and younger people would only turn on AM if that was the only thing that their receiver could pick up. Why is that?
That's where they were raised. I mean, you know, everybody, the adults were all raised listening to the AMs for their news and stuff. And, frankly, a lot of the FMs nowadays, and the majority of them, don't offer a whole lot of the news and what's going on and things like that. That's where your AM's always going to be a leader. FM came in when it first started. FM primarily was more or less a muzak. All it did was play beautiful music, you know, Mantovani and whatnot. And people just had them as just kind of, I don't know why they had them, to tell you the truth, the stations that were doing them, because they weren't selling the advertising on it, and I know it was a cost drain. But the FMs, the biggest problem they've had is selling commercials on them. Because when they started selling commercials, people said, oh, FM is the greatest thing to hear. That was because they could listen to uninterrupted elevator music, I call it. And then when you started trying to sell commercials in between it, it offended them. And the people got mad. And so that's the biggest hurdle FM's had to overcome, is the fact that people perceived it as a, I guess more like what we would say today, an HBO, an uninterrupted commercial type music station. And if anybody's in the business very long, they realize that the only way you can pay the bills and pay the light bills is to sell some advertising along the way to foot those bills. And you got to have advertising on them. And the FMs are changing around. They're more and more becoming more commercialized.
In the 80s, stations were expected to take a little more responsibility and set their own standards for commercials and programming. The FCC interfered less than in the past.
This is just the beginning of a wonderful relationship with radio. We've covered the basics, we've learned some history, and we've heard some tips from some professionals. Radio is a broad field, and it has room for you. I hope that you've learned that your possibilities in broadcasting are endless. I'm Keith Harris. Thanks for joining me.